titans of political debate who are here with us today. This is, honestly, it really is, I think, maybe the most excited I've been during the discussions we've had on this channel. So we have got Destiny.
I can't believe I never heard of this. Kokesh versus Destiny? Incredible.
Who generally, I think I don't want to say too much on their background. I'll let them kind of explain for themselves, but generally leans left. And then Adam, who identifies strongly as libertarian. And this is going to be, like I said, I'm probably going to listen to this several times afterward. But with that, want to mention both of these gentlemen are linked in the description. So if you enjoy what they're saying and you want to hear more, hey, I encourage you to check them out, click those links and subscribe so that way you can hear more of their content. Also, want to mention, let's see, hopefully my audio is good. It's been a little bit rocky, so I hope you can hear me. Let me know in the live chat if anything's funky. But want to say, lastly, feel free, if you enjoy debates on politics or religion, which we have regularly, feel free to hit that subscribe button for reminders as we're trying to build a community of people, whether they lean left or right, Christian, atheist, Jedi or Sith. We're glad to have you here. And with that, we're going to kick it off to our speakers who they've already basically, just before, decided on a topic that they think that they already want to go to at least start. So with that, thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. It's an honor to have you, and the floor is yours.
Well, you really set the bar high with that. You want to give us some direction for introductions?
Well, you mean like introducing the topic?
Or ourselves? I don't know how.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not familiar with our backgrounds.
Yeah, actually, if you'd like to share, I would love it just because, especially in the regarding your views, I want to be as nuanced as possible, and I think it might be best for you guys to explain them just so I don't generalize too much with your past views. So that as well, if you're okay with it.
Sure, well, I'll do the best to
Pride.
give
Whoa,
the
wow.
rundown here then. I was in the Marine Corps from 1999 to 2006, and reserve of 6.5 years, 3 years active duty within that, 1 tour in Fallujah. And that really got me going in activism. And I define an activist as someone who's motivated by a deep-seated sense of injustice. And for me, I was a libertarian before that, but I didn't really know what it meant. It was just socially liberal, fiscally conservative, best of both worlds that are the shitty worlds of mainstream politics that most Americans want nothing to do with anyway. Not really inspiring, but for me it was like, I'm not going to be a Republican or a Democrat. That's freaking lame. Are you kidding me? This is America. There's got to be an option. And I think it was at some point in high school, it was like, you're going to be a Republican or Democrat. My teacher was like, well, if you really have to be something else, there's these libertarians over here. They like to be left alone. And that didn't stop me from enlisting in the military or volunteering to go to Iraq. And a proper understanding of it would have. And it was the belief that libertarianism was a political philosophy rather than an ethical philosophy that kept me from really applying it properly and consistently in my life. And I think just to make it as simple as possible, when you take the word libertarian, it really just can be as inclusive as anybody who believes in freedom. And I think that's great. I think we should be inclusive with the term libertarian. To me, I have a specific understanding of that freedom is what...
I don't accept that. I think that there's a danger in being too inclusive and that you water down the movement. We're a movement, libertarians, we're a movement of ideological change. And while we should recruit, I think we have to remain relatively hardcore in our beliefs because there's a lot of people, you say freedom, well, that could be anybody. Anybody can support freedom, but they're going to bring with them their political views, which are antithetical to the libertarian system, like libertarian socialists or sort of mainstream conservatives who advocate for freedom, but also support military intervention, the status quo domestically on government spending, basically the complete opposite of the libertarian program.
What you have when no one is forcing their will on you, when your right to live, to exercise your self-ownership, however you see fit, doesn't have any forceful interference. And what this suggests is a system of ethics that we would describe as the non-aggression principle. You own yourself. That's why it's wrong for someone to claim ownership over you like a slave or a possession or anything else. That's why it's wrong to hit you, to take your stuff. So anything that's force or fraud or coercion between one person and another person creates a win-lose relationship instead of a win-win relationship that we have with cooperative, voluntary relationship. So the ideal that's suggested here is of peace and harmony, where all human relationships are voluntary, free of force, fraud, and coercion. And so while I'm happy with the more inclusive label libertarian, specifically for me, what that means, and I think for most people who really consider to have been libertarian for any period of time and really gotten to develop a coherent, cohesive worldview from that, the terms voluntarism, or someone who believes in the non-aggression principle, really describe the ethical philosophy that it's at the heart of what is often misconstrued as a political philosophy.
You bet. Thank you so much, Adam. And Destiny, thanks as well for both of you being on. Destiny, if you want to share about your background as well as your views, glad to have you.
Yeah, I guess I don't know how far back we're going, but I mean, I guess I've been a Twitch streamer for 10 years. We talk politics a lot. I used to be libertarian or libertarian leaning back in high school, and then I've kind of gotten a little older. I've kind of grown differently. I view things a little bit different. I mean, obviously being on the opposite end here, I'm going to say that the state is probably necessary in order to secure any meaningful freedoms or meaningful rights, that simply having a non-aggression principle doesn't in practice ensure that anybody has any sort of right, because without some sort of state to enforce laws, we're not going to be able to protect each other's freedoms, and that a group of people that are loosely bound between a non-aggression principle would never be able to resist outside influence or invasion either. So that'll probably be the position that I'll be defending here.
You bet. So with that, regarding the police issue, that was something that Adam mentioned that would be an interesting point to start with, which he had said you had interesting ideas on that.
It's interesting that Destiny is trying to frame the debate sort of within the spectrum of minarchism versus anarchism, as opposed to a full-throated defense of left liberal democracy.
And so if you guys want to start with that, and then, like I said, feel free wherever you want to go.
I mean, I can start. I can put forth the positive, and then you can attack it if you want, or you can put forth your, I mean, whichever way you want to do.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I would say that for... so I don't know if I don't believe in any sort of like intrinsic rights. I don't think they exist, and I think that a right only exists insofar as you have the ability to secure that right. So for instance, my ability to live a free, happy life, you can call that a right, but if I can't afford healthcare, or if I can't afford food, or if I can't afford shelter, I mean, that doesn't really mean much to me. So it seems that in today's society, the best way to secure the greatest amount of freedom, economically, politically, and socially, for a large number of people is through some sort of state that is supposed to have an authorization to use force on its people to ensure that we all follow laws and conduct ourselves in ways that are conducive to a society. So things like paying taxes, or building where we're supposed to, or living where we're supposed to, and stuff like that. I would argue that these seem to be necessary things to ensure that we're like a free and prosperous people.
There have been societies which guaranteed individuals not just freedom from coercion and aggression and force, but freedom to, in the sense, it's not freedom at all, really, but freedom in the sense that Destiny's using the word as the freedom to eat, the freedom to have health care, freedom in the sense of ability to do something. The problem is these societies were societies like the Soviet Union, and they failed completely. A free society doesn't promise you a meal or it doesn't promise you anything free, but instead gives you the opportunity to work for anything that you want. So the famous life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you're guaranteed life in that society has built rules that prohibit murder. You're guaranteed liberty, as in you're free to use to go about your life, to pursue your own ends. Nobody's going to control your life and tell you what to do. and you're free to pursue your own happiness, but you're not going to have that provided to you by the state.
Well, that's very concise.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I want to go into that for hours and hours and open up so many different avenues based on that. I thought we were going to start with the police stuff because that kind of gives us a...
Oh, yeah, we can start. Yeah, we can do the police as a microcosm for the NAP or something. Sure. Yeah, we can start with just police.
Well, because I really liked your commentary on this case. And I think what you're starting with is kind of a pragmatic approach, right? Of,
Mm-hmm.
How to survive a police encounter.
Yeah.
And it's been a big part of my activism in civil disobedience to challenge police authority. And I really liked what you said, and I forget who it was that you were streaming with in that video, but that it would, de-escalate first. Like, and that was the one thing you really criticized the guy who was being harassed by police in that video, was that he got irate and escalated.
Mm-hmm.
But you also made it clear that there's no right of the police, and you said that this was a good line, that there's a barrier here to state power, that they can't just stop you and ask for your ID. And I remember someone in your stream pointed this out to you, is that that's not entirely true. And what you're looking at is a certain federal precedent. But there are still about half a dozen states in the U.S. where they call them shall ID states, but they have shall ID law. And Louisiana is one of them. And I didn't know this when I was there, but I was asked for an ID as a passenger in a traffic stop and refused to provide it, and was arrested for not showing ID. And I followed your advice in the sense that I said, I'm gonna de-escalate. I'm not gonna get irate. I'm not gonna yell. I'm not gonna be confrontational. They came charging at us in this scenario, and what I saw was an opportunity. Like you said, if you feel like challenging it, sit down, say, cool, I'm gonna get a lawyer, and that's what we've done in this case. We've got challenging that. So what I would ask you is to see then if there's this barrier where state power is. It should be limited to when there's a suspicion of having committed a crime, that you can't violate someone's right to just exist, to be somewhere, without you can't interfere with that. You can't stop them unless they've been accused of a crime or you suspect them of a crime. Like what is the moral basis that you would see for that, or are you just seeing it as legal precedent?
So the moral basis that I would view for most of these things is I don't actually intrinsically care about like a person's individual freedom or any of that as an end to itself. I see all of these as a means to achieving the end of securing the greatest amount of happiness.
So here I would certainly disagree with Destiny. I do believe in an individual's freedom as an end to itself, as the highest political goal, because it's with freedom that we can live our life, that we can flourish as human beings.
For the greatest amount of people. And so when I say happiness, I mean like socially, so like we can go out and get jobs and go to school and travel. I mean politically, we can vote in free elections, hopefully that are not being tampered with. Economically, that we have the means to secure work and then buy things for ourselves, like these types of things. So this is generally what I'm looking at maximizing. So when it comes to like dealing with police and like what should they be allowed to do, what shouldn't they be allowed to do, having it so that a police can like walk up and ID any person they want, I don't see a reason for it. As far as I'm aware, like the empirical data on things like stop and frisk just aren't positive. Like police use it to just abuse people, they racially target people, they don't actually like come up with any kind of meaningful charges. Like it's really dumb. But like when you talk about something like something that I was kind of back and forth on, sometimes they do the DUI stops where they'll just have like a cop set up and like when people are driving down, they just stop everybody checking from DUI. Initially, I was kind of not okay with that, but I mean, if this does a really good job at keeping drunk drivers off the road, I don't know if I want to subject, when my son becomes a teenager, I don't know if this is something that keeps other drunk drivers off the road from like colliding with him and killing him. I'm probably okay, in this case with your travel being encumbered. So.
Okay, so when I see even that bigger goal of maximizing happiness, anything that you do as a central planner has, all of the fallacies of central planning attached to all of the risks, all of the unintended consequences. When you say, I'm going to do something for the happiness of others, and I'm going to use that.
And isn't the happiness of the group achieved through the happiness of the individual? Aren't people, when left to their own devices, most able to pursue their own happiness? And isn't the happiness of the individual the happiness of the group? The group doesn't exist. It's an abstraction. It's an idea. The individual exists. If the individual is allowed to pursue their own happiness, then and achieves their own happiness through that freedom, then the group too will be happy, since the group is a collection of individuals.
As an excuse, as I would say, and you would call it reasoning, but it sounds to me like it's an excuse to say, then we don't have to adhere to basic moral principles that we would. And you say you don't believe in rights, and I understand that this can get kind of semantic.
It sounds like Destiny is embracing utilitarianism, that whatever creates the maximum good for the largest number of people is best. But there's a real problem with that philosophy, in that our judgment of the collective good is inherently subjective. And this whole line of thought can be used to rationalize some pretty clearly immoral behavior. After all, it was precisely under this whole idea of for the greater good that we've seen evil carried out in the Soviet Union, in experiments with communism and socialism in Cuba. This notion that if it's good for the majority, then who cares what happens to the minority? If you seize the property of the kulaks and collectivize it, well, they're just rich, wealthy landowners, and they don't really matter. What matters is the majority, the starving peasants, will collectivize the land and feed them. But then the unintended consequences are that, well, the kulaks actually knew how to work the land and were really incentivized to work the land, and you have a famine. So you end up actually making things worse. So rather than a simple utilitarian viewpoint, isn't it better to adopt moral principles to look at a situation and say, what are some fundamental moral principles that govern interactions between individuals and individuals in organizations, and then adopt those principles, looking not at the result, but at the actions that are taken.
But that right can be a construct, fine. But do you believe then in a fundamental ethical that governs the personal religion?
Wait, the last thing you just said kind of cut off a little bit. Can you say that again?
Do you believe in a universal moral standard or ethical relation?
I can answer that. Can you talk a little bit more, though, so I understand what you mean when you say that?
Right. So, as I said this again, with libertarianism being an ethical philosophy around political philosophy,
wait. Is there? I don't know if there's like a threshold you can set for the microphone, or be a little bit closer. Sometimes it cuts out. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem on my end. It's just the headset.
Okay, wait. Is it just my end, or is it cutting out for you too?
I'm also hearing it.
Okay, just so that I don't miss the sentences. Maybe just a little bit closer to the mic, but okay, yeah. Sorry, go again.
All right, maybe if I just hunch over like this and my mouth is a little bit closer to my Bluetooth, is that better?
Yeah, it sounds really good right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So the hunch over solving to technical difficulties issues is, yes, I like this. Keep it simple. No, but the idea that the libertarian philosophy is based on a universal ethical standard, based on you own yourself. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about maximizing human happiness, I don't want to look at policies and say, well, I'm going to tinker with this or tinker with that, or I'm going to be a better central planner, or I'm going to make decisions for other people based on their happiness. I'm going to look at fundamental ethical principles. And when you look at what maximizes happiness in an individual,
if you look at the concept of utility in economics, and utility is basically the satisfaction that people get from stuff. When people pursue their own ends, they're most able to maximize their utility or their happiness. So, for example, if I spend my money on, I'm going to spend it on my most highest ordered ends, whatever I value most. You know, it might be groceries, it might be rent, it might be paying bills. And so on and so forth, right? You've got these priorities, and then as you go down, you get lower and lower priorities. So when you spend on your highest valued ends, your most important priorities, and so on and so forth. But when the state taxes you and then spends your money on yourself, or even on somebody else, the decisions are made by central planners, by bureaucrats, by politicians, and they're not aware of anybody's value scales, and their decisions aren't made with those value scales in mind. So you end up with the money being spent on something that is politically expedient, something that might enrich the friends of the politician themselves, something that's important for the political party that's in power, or something that's politically expedient, something that's popular among the population at large, or something that aggrandizes the state power in general, but it's got nothing to do with what you want.
Individual relationship between two people, or just any group of people, you always look at what is the detriment to that happiness in most cases. And of course, you can say that want is a detriment, and this is, we can get into the concept of positive and negative rights if you wanted to try to parse that out if that's relevant. But that the dictum, the absolute standard for what maximizes a relationship between individuals is that there's no violence, there's no coercion. And anytime you have a relationship that's not voluntary, where there's a winner and there's a loser, right? Someone is being subjected, or someone's individual will is being subverted. And what I want to see is a world of nothing but win-win relationship. And this isn't to say,
and that's the beauty of the market economy, is that the market economy is predicated upon mutually beneficial interactions, exchanges. The reason why people trade is because they expect to benefit. And they're almost certainly correct in that assessment, because they've got a lifetime of experience evaluating whether or not a trade benefits them. So in the market economy, if you work a job, then you trade your labor to your employer. The employer values your labor more than the money he trades. You value the money you're going to receive more than you value having the day off, and it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Likewise, you go to a store, you buy a good, same sort of reciprocal, beneficial. So in the market economy, it's just a series of mutually beneficial exchanges, people making each other's lives better. That's all capitalism is, full stop. That's the totality of the system. Yes, it's incredibly complicated, and there's so many exchanges of different things going on, and people joining together in organizations, and that's what's going on. And with the state, however, it's not mutually beneficial exchanges. Instead, with political action, you have plunder, legalized plunder. You have groups benefiting at the expense of other groups. The interactions become win-lose instead of win-win. And now what matters is who has the most political power. So people have to expend effort trying to obtain political power so that they can dominate and subjugate and conquer others, as opposed to using economic power to serve the interests of other people and prospering in that regard?
One of the ways that libertarianism as a political philosophy has been mispresented is that it's government this, government that. And so I would use the example of, a lot of people think of libertarianism as pro-gun, and in the sense that it absolutely is. But at a deeper level, it's pro-private property. You have a right to own whatever property you want on your own land if you're not hurting anybody else. You can have metal in any shape you want. You're not threatening anybody else. No one has a right to interfere with that. Similarly, I have a right on my property to say, no guns allowed on my land. And if you bring a gun onto my land, then you're violating my right as that property owner. And if a bunch of people want to form a community where they say guns aren't allowed and they come together voluntarily and they don't force that on anybody else, they have that right. So It's not that government can or shouldn't this, but you can have as much government as you want as long as it's voluntary. And this is where, if you define government as a coercive monopoly, as I do, that's how I use the word, then it's fundamentally unethical. It's holding us back from that potential ideal of harmony in ethical society. If you we're going to transform into something voluntary, say, well, that wouldn't really be a government, but if you want to call that a government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I kind of want to test one of your ideas here. So you told me that like securing the rights of people, that resides in like a fundamental moral area for you. That's like fundamentally kind of what you're building off of. Is that?
Well, just to be precise with the language, I wouldn't say securing, because securing suggests a proactive service, affecting the natural state of rights that an individual consciousness in its own body has self-ownership.
Okay, so respecting other people's rights, not necessarily with some third party, but just respecting other people's rights, that's the fundamental moral thing that you're trying to get at, right?
Right. There's that universal standard of ethics that would suggest a non-violent society.
Sure. Okay. So fundamentally, this is where I disagree. So I just want to ask a couple questions, and then we can kind of see if we agree or disagree on this. So if I were to posit two worlds, and I were to say that in one world, everybody's rights are respected, everybody adheres to the non-aggression principle, they all have their private property, they don't interact with one another. Let's say that in this world, you do have upticks.
They don't interact with one another?
And things like crime or disease or other warring factions can come in and kill groups of people or whatever. And then in another world, it's entirely centrally planned. So the amount of freedom that you have is severely restricted, but you don't have these same like epidemics of crime or disease or other people coming in and killing your people. Which of these two worlds do you prefer and why?
So I'm going to answer the question I think Destiny's really asking is, if a free society produced inferior results, would you still favor it? For me, I would still favor it.
Right. Well, it's funny because I have a similar thought exercise that I take in a different way, which is, would you rather live in a world where government is huge but peaceful and runs half the economy, but only exerts enough coercion to maintain those monopolies and more or less provides what the market would? Or would you rather live in a government or under a government that's tiny but murders 1% of the population at random? And the question is, how do you measure the evil of a government, and how much does it take us off our natural state of harmony? So you can look at those kinds of outcomes as you put forth. I understand that your question there is getting at a slightly different angle in terms of the outcome.
Well, yeah, so on my, just to be clear, on my question, I'm just trying to figure out, because you said that fundamentally what you're worried about is like this natural state of harmony or people's rights. And what I'm trying to push you on that to see if that's really what you care about. Because it seems to me that if you had a fundamental claim here, if you fundamentally cared about people's rights, that you'd be okay with it even if they let people into like dying or something, right? If more people died or more people were subject to crime. But if you say, well, in that case, I don't think I would care, then that means there's something more fundamental that we need to get at. That's what I'm curious about.
Right, no, okay, I see where you're going. Very good question. Hey, give me a second. I haven't really considered it from that angle, but I have a couple ways I want to go about this.
Yeah, sure.
And one of them is that defining crime. Right, and this is where you're saying that if it's done by government, it's inherently not crime, and I would disagree, and I think you would agree. You have to have the same objective analysis of government. You can't give government a pass and say, well, just because a group of people call themselves government, it's okay for them to murder or steal. And when it comes down to it, taxation theft, that's the either government owns you, or when it threatens you with force or forcefully taking your stuff away if you don't pay taxes, that means that they are using violence against you in order to take your stuff. That's a form.
I think he's sort of rambling here, but another possible answer is that we want to, or maybe what he's getting at is that libertarians want to reduce the amount of crime, whether it be by the state or by individuals.
That. So if you live under a government that's doing that all the time, that's taking 50% of your income, as it is today for the average American, if you add up all the fees, fines, and hidden costs of the government, and it's working for government half the year. And that's a form of theft. That's a great crime. If you look at all the crimes committed by the U.S. military, by the police state, every time the police
just to kind of move through these one at a time, I'm not sure if I would agree that the average American pays 50% of their money to taxes to the government. That seems kind of extreme.
No. It's if you add up, it's not in direct taxes, but if you go like when in the cost of goods, in the cost of banking, and the inflation tax, when you add up everything, I understand the payroll tax, direct taxes, and sales taxes are significantly less than that. But when you add up all the compounds, all the compounded different taxes that you pay, and all the processes that go into providing consumer goods, for the average American, average working American, it adds up to about.
Okay, I think I would challenge a lot of the math used to get there, but I guess it's kind of a different conversation. I will take issue with this idea that like taxation is a form of theft. I think it's pretty rare that people take things from you and.
So this is very central to the libertarian argument, the notion that taxation is theft, that the state is a criminal organization. So what's the foundation here? Well, unlike all other organizations in society, the state uses coercion as a means of obtaining revenue. Okay? So a corporation, a business, McDonald's, for example, they obtain revenue by selling a good. Workers obtain revenue by working through their labor. Churches obtain revenue through donations. Only the state claims the right to use coercion as a means of obtaining revenue. So if you, with income tax, if you don't pay the income tax, the state reserves the right to throw you in jail. It's a crime. You've committed a crime. The punishment is several years in jail, say. And furthermore, if when the police come to arrest you and you defend yourself against this aggression, then they reserve the right to kill you. So the state not only coerces you, but they threaten you with death in order to do so. So is taxation theft? What type of theft is it? It's extortion. They say, give us your money or we'll hurt you. That's textbook extortion. Look it up in the dictionary. That's what it said.
Leave you something in exchange for them. I don't know if I know.
What do they leave you? Protection services? That's what the mafia does. They go to you, they say, give us your money or something will happen to your store. But if you give us your money, we'll watch over you. We'll provide you protection. That's textbook extortion as well. The same business model, the mafia and the state. Furthermore, if a robber did, a mugger did hand you a vase of flowers after he robbed you at gunpoint, that would not negate the act of threatening you with violence in order to get your money. If the state wants to claim that taxes are voluntary, then they have to be voluntary. Just like any other voluntary transaction, both sides have to agree to it. Both sides have to be able to sever the arrangement at any time.
And then also, like,
well, if you don't have choice, it don't matter if you leave stuff for someone. I mean, the mafia provides protection for people that are subject to its protection services. They give something back, but if it's not what you want, if you don't have a choice, it's still.
I mean, I guess, but we have a choice in terms of like who our leaders are. Like, we vote on these people democratically, and that's.
We have an election every 4 years, but that's not really choice. Democracy just serves to provide the criminal state with an appearance of legitimacy. I don't get to choose who's in government or what the government does. Whether I vote or not, the outcome of the election is going to be the exact same. Democracy is really just the biggest scam there is, because under the guise of democracy, the state can do anything it wants, and who am I to complain, because this is the will of the people, according to the Democrat. Democracy is really just a soft form of communism. What I want is liberty. I want the right to live my life, to pursue my own interests, and to be able to keep the fruit of my labors.
People to live together and do that, right? To vote on our leaders, to get them.
Who is this we, white man? I never agreed to this whole system. I never signed a social contract. And the social contract, by the way, it is a creation myth. It's not what actually happened. If you look at Oppenheimer's research, the origin of the state came from one tribe conquering another and needing to exact tribute from the conquered tribesmen. And that's been the nature of the state since its inception. It's been a tool of subjugation, domination, and exploitation, a means by which one class can live parasitically off another. Democracy didn't change that. In fact, in the 18th and 19th century, with the rise of liberalism and the influence of the ideas of the liberals, the state was substantially tamed. What existed prior to that was absolutism, where kings could do as they please, grant monopoly privilege, set import quotas, intervene in the economy, do whatever they wanted. And liberalism changed that. They recognized that the state had to be constrained. They put limits, and they fought the state, and they won. That's where basic concepts like freedom of the press and free speech and freedom of assembly came from. These things didn't always exist. They were fought for by the liberals against the state. But what happened was, just like liberalism led to the downfall of the absolute state and led to these ideas of limited government, of gold standard money, of peace and free trade and prosperity and the flourishing of human society, so too did other ideas influence the 20th century, ideas like socialism and communism and welfarism, and the idea of the welfare state, from cradle to grave, looking after people, and high taxes and the progressive income tax and inflation and war, and all these terrible, terrible things came about because of the philosophies that people advocated. You see, ultimately, it's ideas that effect change. Not so much the actions of individuals, but what they believe, what they teach.
Minority in an election and you vote against something, it's still on you. If you don't have a right to opt out, it's being
Well, you do have a right to opt out, right? You can leave if you really don't want to be.
Can I, though? Is that the same thing? First of all, you'd have to get a country to take you. I have Canadian citizenship, not citizenship in whatever country I want to go to. Secondly, the state is everywhere, so I'm back to square one. Of course, I can't necessarily afford to up and leave. In another country, I wouldn't be able to work because I'm not a citizen. I suppose you could argue that I could go live in the woods like Thoreau, too. But I'm not opposed to society. I'm not opposed to interacting with people. I'm opposed to the state. So I can't leave. The relationship is in no means voluntary. And why should I be the one to leave? They're the ones who suck.
Want to opt out of the state? You can leave.
You can't be free on your own land in the United States. You can't say my right to do business without being subjected to theft is being respected. I'd rather
Well, if you
see
wanted
that.
to be free in the United States, wouldn't you be disrespecting the non-aggression principle because you would have to capture land back that's already federally owned? Wouldn't you have to be stealing that back from the United States?
The state is a criminal organization. They have no legitimate claim to ownership of anything.
Well, no, I bought land, for one. I didn't actually buy land, Bill, but the government's claims to land are not legitimate. And actually, this might get to a more fundamental question if you want to go this way with it. That, if you say that the government has some special ownership rights over people because it claimed this territory, what is a legitimate claim to owning land? And this is where I would believe in the principle of home. You can't just put up a fence around 1 million acres and say, well, because I say so, that's all mine. I mean, that's
Well, I guess real quick, just to get through some of these, hammer this. So you said that you bought land. Just because you buy land doesn't mean that you own it as like an autonomous state, right? So like I own land in the United States, but I still have to pay property taxes on it because I recognize that like it still falls under the authority of the United States government. And then in terms of like what is a legitimate claim to owning land, I mean, you said that you are very much a big believer in like private property, right? So I mean, if you wanted to throw up a big a big fence around 1 million acres, I mean, as long as it's your property, I'd imagine you would say you'd have the right to do so, no?
No. There's a certain reasonable standard of
What he's saying is that if the land was unowned, he couldn't just throw up a fence around it and claim it as his own. If he owned it, sure, but if it was unowned, you have to mix your labor with the land to homestead it. You have to improve it. Like for example, if there's some wilderness, you build a farm, then that farm should belong to you, right? Because you've improved it, you've made something, so it should be yours.
what qualifies as homesteading, because part of the standard that's expected here is that every human being on Earth has a right to equitable access to natural resources. If I'm, this is why I got 10 acres, and I feel that that's a reasonable amount that I can say I've fenced in, I'm using it, I'm building on it, I'm developing it. It's a reasonable space for a single family homestead. If I were to put up like I said, a fence around 1 million acres, that would not be a legitimate claim to that property because I couldn't make a reasonable case that I was actually using it.
How would you homestead things out for what about when we talk about natural resources like fossil fuels, or how would we set up a city where nobody is allowed to theoretically interact with another person's private property if they don't give consent to it? What if I just bought the New York Times Central or whatever, and I'm I don't want anybody to come here anymore? How do we deal with things like roads and whatnot?
Well,
when it comes to, for example, mining or oil wells, assuming the land is unowned, whoever starts to mine there or starts to drill for oil owns that stuff. If you want to spend $1 billion and buy Times Square and tell people they can't go there, then that's your right as an American. As for roads, historically a lot of roads were created privately, but yeah, roads should be created, maintained by organizations or individuals.
Setbacks and easements, and I mean it's not that hard to imagine. I mean, a lot of people. It's funny you go straight to the roads because a lot of people who aren't libertarian ask, almost facetiously, but without government, who's going to build the roads? And of course, I know you're not asking the question that way, but at a deeper level, really about how do we manage shared property use. And I think when we have a system that's based on respect for individual rights, it's based on non-coercion, it's based on non-violence and cooperation rather than a single coercive monopoly, then we're going to have a better system. And there are already ways that we do. And in most examples, we have people are happier than when we have a coercive, centrally planned system. that is obviously corruptible and inherently tramples individual rights at some level.
Well, let's say you have like a city that's growing and everybody has their individual homesteads, and there's like one guy that's holding out in the middle, and he doesn't want to give an easement with anybody, and it disrupts the entire flow of this entire city. Like, how would you deal with somebody like that? Or what if like 3 or 4 property owners got together and they said no trespassing between all of our properties, and it ends up blocking off access to like an entire part of a city or something? How would you do that?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. That's not much of a hypothetical. It's a real situation that we face today in a lot of cases. I think it's a diner in, is it Austin? I think it's Austin, where there's a diner downtown, and it's like some 50s, 60s, like really cool structure.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy was going to sell it to a developer who was going to build it out as a multi-use building with retail underneath, and Denver. I'm sorry, it was in Denver.
Okay.
And if anybody wants to check on this was in the news. This was on Drudge Report this morning, actually, and the developer wanted to buy out the property and put in this big multi-use structure, and it was the historical society that actually came in and said, no, you can't. That we want your building that you own to be designated as an historical monument so that it can't be developed. So in this case, it's a collective that's being used in the opposite sense of what you as proposing development, but still interfering with property rights. So if the people want to keep that building there, if they want for historical purposes, but they don't own it, the right of ownership still needs to be respected. How do they achieve that goal? Well, they have to offer the owner more money or a better deal in whatever way than what this developer is paying. So now we talked about the challenge in terms of developing the city when you want to develop the city. And in that case, you don't have a right to bulldoze someone's home because you want to put a city around it. And if you can't get them to budge, then that's tough city. You can't just violate that guy's ownership or that family and say, no, your home can't be here anymore. But
I'm kind of curious.
Let me just one last point. But if you want to develop that city however you want, and you want to start fresh, and you want to bring a bunch of people together, you want to homestead new land, and this is one of the things where government is going the way today and preventing you. I want you to have that right to be able to settle that and create your own community from scratch without standards of law.
Okay, so backing up, let's say that I get into a thing where, let's say that I'm very wealthy for whatever reason, and I go into cities and I just start buying out land in the middle and then saying I don't want anybody to go on it, and I try to destroy cities that way. What would keep me from doing something like that?
I'm not sure there's any value in this hypothetical. Is there any history of evil supervillains trying to destroy cities by buying up core lots? Is that even possible? How do you even destroy a city by buying property in it? I mean, you've only got the property, you don't have the roads. I guess you could buy the roads if they were for sale. It's also possible to get an easement on property so that if somebody did have a vital use for that land, that could be secured prior to the sale.
Well, you say destroy a city. It would be just purchasing it and doing something else that you want with it. If you have an economic system now, when you say that in today's world under government, which creates huge unnatural concentrations of wealth and power, that is a real hypothetical problem, because you do have, things like Epstein's Island, right? Where, a guy who, without a government managed economy, without the opportunities that come from corporatism and all the other things, probably wouldn't have the kind of money that he is able to do something like that. And you have, a world, where the economy is based around